Hey guys, I'm not going to be using ChatGPT today. I haven't really been using it much lately. I don't know, I just don't use it much anymore. Um, so this video will be something that's interesting, to say the least. So, I believe it was yesterday, maybe it was the day before. Um, I had a realization occur to me that there's this funny thing going on with airports and ICE and all that. But even before that, if we go back to 1991, where the USSR collapsed and all that, technically speaking, what should have been, but it didn't happen. What should have happened was Americans were supposed to. This spider just showed up on the wall right there. What was supposed to happen was every American in the United States was supposed to be allowed to go to the post-Soviet Union without visas and without restrictions. That didn't happen. Why didn't it happen? Instead, what we got, I believe that's another spider right there. There's a lot of spiders in here. Well, only those two so far. But, instead what we got was, and 10 years later, it got more strict. Americans couldn't go anywhere. They didn't have freedom of movement that Americans claim to have. So, what happened? I don't know. But I can tell you that you don't have freedom of movement anymore. And of course, we've gone to the point from 2001 where you're always going to have TSA and everything like that. And you can't use democracy to go back on that. But had we done that, had we had done Russia and all that, and having Westerners or Americans, whichever one you want to say, would be able to mingle with the pro-Soviets, that would be a sign of assimilation, in a way, and you wouldn't have the problems I don't think you would have today if that was to happen. But it didn't happen. So instead what you get is Americans so detached from the world and so isolated where they believe that the most important and most influential, yet they're not outside, they're restricted by their own government. You have to show an ID, a passport, all this for you can even fly on a plane. And it's interesting because now you're seeing ICE in all these airports. But notice what they're saying. It's international airports, as far as I'm aware. Actually, we need to check that out. Hang on, I'm going to have to... You're going to see remnants of a previous video did. So let me make sure that I can do... Make sure I can put this on here. Oops. Didn't mean to do that. That's the time and day that I'm recording this. So let me reset my thing right here. Because I do want to look into the whole... Okay, is this working? Yeah, it's working. Alright, let's see. And this was a previous video I did. I believe it was the last. I believe it was the last video. Yeah, it was the last video I did. I think I did 2 videos today. I think. No, it just feels like I did 2 because I had to do an edit. Anyways, it, and this is interesting. Yeah, it's airports. So you see all this. It says ICE agents are now patrolling U.S. airports, and then to some U.S. airports. So it's the busiest airports amid TSA shortages. So we're being deployed around 14 airports. I know that in Houston, those huge lines. So this is, people don't really know what's going. Yeah, I didn't know this. It's at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. They're at international airports. That's very interesting. Because they're international airports, they're not domestic airports. They've been spotted at exit points across terminals. Yeah, look, it's all international airports. Well, they were also at IAH, which is, what is it? Not Hobby, it's, is it George Bush International? I believe it's George Bush International. JFK International Airport, LaGuardia Airport, LaGuardia. Is that international? I don't know if that's international. Hugh, I don't think is international. Most of these are international though. Just scanning here. Okay, more international airport. Phoenix. Oh, Phoenix International Airport. Sky Harbor. Puerto Rico International Airport. New Orleans International Airport. Florida International. Pittsburgh International. These are international airports. LaGuardia is the only one that, and I don't think, is LaGuardia, I think it, I don't know. But all these are international except these 2, New York and Houston HOU. But I heard that they were in IAH as well. So this might not be a complete list. So what is this about? Well, we don't know what it's about. What this is, it's gonna sound weird, but you're gonna understand in a second. This is good news for me, bad news for you. The reason for that is this sets precedent for DHS to be in the position that I said that the CBP would have to be in. Which I said in a previous video, like 2 months, what was it, 2 months ago, a month ago, where I said that in 2033, CPB is going to be in a position where they're going to be checking people and they're going to be checking if you can be allowed to leave the country. So So they're not going to replace TSA. They're going to be there to show your tickets and badge, not a badge, but tickets. They're going to check your luggage and all that. So they're going to be in the front row, and then you got to go through TSA. That's what's going to happen. So that sets precedent to what I've been saying. The CBP has been working in airports, but they're on the other side. CBP operates before people get into the airport, which is very interesting for us because they're right there with TSA, which is on the other side of anyone coming internationally into the airport. So, yeah. So they're in our, whoever is going in the airport, flying an international flight, they're the ones being checked. It's not the people coming in. Although CBP already operates over there on the other side, but they don't operate on this side. So we got that out of the way. So what I don't understand is, going back to 1991, what I don't understand is, there were 300, how many people lived in 1991? Approximately 252 million people, so, yeah, we got 330 now. So, we have 253 million people are in the United States in 1991, and not one of them questioned, why are we not, if we won the Cold War, then how come we're not able to assimilate with the pro-Soviets? Why can't we travel freely to Ukraine without not only without visas, but with no 30-day, 180-day limits and restrictions? How come we can't just travel over there? Because there was a point, a very brief moment in time, where in Russia, there was actually more freedom in Russia than anywhere, even in the United States, anywhere in Western Europe. There was a very brief period of time where that was true. But there was a huge war that, well, it wasn't a huge war, it was a coup that happened, but not with Gorbachev, but after that brief period of time where it was more free, but nothing happened on our side. We could have done it. It would have been easy to do. But 253 million people did not bother to ask that question. It was not even on the news. No one bothered to ask. No one. And here's what I can say. I'll blame the CIA for that. I could blame them for that. But I have to blame Americans for that, because you didn't bother to ask that question. You didn't bother to question authority. You didn't bother to do anything with that. No one brought that up politically, where we now follow politics of people seeing these people as enemies now, and it's really narratives against ourselves. And not only that, but I have a saying. Specifically for this, it's a vote of silence is a silence for, is a vote. I'm messing it up. A vote of silence is a vote for silence. Even if you didn't realize you had the choice. So I'll say that again. A vote of silence is a vote for silence, even if you didn't realize you had a choice. So even if you were set up and all that by the CIA to not be able to mingle with the so-called post-enemies, you didn't bring it up. So that must be a democratic oversight or something, because 253 million people obviously did not ask that question. Now, of course, I don't know what it's going by. It says 253. The population, that could be, it could include children as well. But if you don't include, I'm not including children, of course. But people who were eligible to vote and be able to cast their vote in and bring this up, no one did. So I consider that a problem of the American democracy and independence and all that Western capitalism, assimilation, and all this. You clearly know this stuff, but now you're speaking about it. How long has it been? 35 years later, and we're suffering from the problems of that. So, yeah. Um, and I'll tell you where this is going. It's clear to me. Um, Obviously, you are being played, set up, and I'll say this, and not a lot of people, it doesn't offend a lot of people, and I hope it does offend you. What I'm about to say is, the CIA owns the largest ownership of livestock in the world. And there are those 330 million Americans who don't ask questions, who just go along, who would not have the nerve to tell a CPB agent when they're in an airport, they say, well, you got to turn around and get those papers that you need. They don't have the nerve to say, I don't need papers to travel where I want to go. But you know who has the nerve to do that? They talk about independence. They talk about democracy. But they don't even bring up their own thing. They got to wait for someone else to bring it up. And they say, oh, yeah, we agree with that on the news and on their screens, on all this other side of their Facebooks, their whatever. And say, I agree with that, but they don't. But no one has their own thinking. They don't have the nerve to do that. Yet they preach a freedom of movement, freedom of speech, independence. Oh, they do that. Oh, they'll tell you that for political reasons, but they won't go up there and tell that to the federal government. And I hope that does offend you. Because you're getting exactly what you asked for. Even if you hadn't, like I said, a vote of silence is a vote for silence. You're being silenced by your words, by what you say, by isolating yourself from the rest of the world. And it's compressing upon you. And you say, well, we never leave because there's nothing, America is the greatest country in the world, so why would we leave? Well, you just separate yourself from everybody else. And you only make it harder for yourself. And that's the politics, and it all comes together. So, if you can't see that, which is happening very, very quickly, if you can't see that, well, you're eventually going to see it. Eventually. Whether it's before it happens or right after it happens. I know when it happens. It's 2033. And it's interesting how I've also said that in 2030, by the time we get to 2030, the FBI, all of them, the DOJ, all of them will leave airports. But at the same time, the DHS is going to be coming in and take their places. And let me tell you something about ICE. They're not your friends. These are the people. These are the people who they're essentially animal herders. They're not about you. They see everyone as an animal. Everyone is a variety of animal. You got the pigs over there. You got the sheep. You got the every animal that would be on a farm of sheep, pigs, horses, whatever. And they separate them in their pens and keep everyone in line. Customs enforcement. The customs of the animals, the customs of Americans. Separate them, separate them from everybody else and call it Border Patrol. That's what that's what it is. Now, what they don't protect you from are the wolves, and the wolves come in through the holes in the fences. They're not coming through the airports. They're coming through your TVs. They're coming through your whatever you watch, and that's propaganda that they send. And there's different kinds. They can be in your groups. They can be your friends. They can be your enemies. They can be anybody. They can be from overseas, but you don't have the discernment to realize who's a wolf. And all the ICE cares about, all DHS cares about, are everyone's an animal. They just need to be herded. They're not there to protect you. They're there to if you cause a problem, well, your politics cause a problem, they separate you from them, from the wolves. It's like creating a barrier and a bubble where they don't keep you away from the wolves, but they compress what the wolves push you towards into until you're in this little pen and can't escape. That's what they do. Until you're taken over by national security agencies. From one perspective, from the CIA's perspective, it's a social experiment. From ISIS's perspective, everyone's an animal. From the conservative perspective, they're saving America from illegals and all these other people. Well, everyone's on a different page, and only few of them knows what's truly going on. And it ain't the conservatives. It ain't the Democrats either, but conservatives are the backbone of the CPB, ICE, DHS, and the DHS backbone is the CIA. So the DHS is pretty much the middleman of herding everybody under the authority of the conservatives. And of course, there's nothing you can do about that. And it just gets compressed. And eventually, as it gets smaller and smaller, people are going to start realizing, this is weird. And if you understand history, you look at history and you realize that things that happen in America, and you look at past history of America and what people have been saying, it doesn't line up to the modern day. And you start asking questions. You realize, well, we're not in control here. So, I felt like I needed to talk about that. I have it in my notes. I said airports and ICE. Okay, I talked about that. It says international airport. I wrote international airports, and let's check. Is LaGuardia an international airport? It's primarily a domestic airport serving the New York City area. While it handles limited international flights to Canada and Caribbean, which often uses pre-clearance. What does that mean, pre-clearance? It generally lacks the full U.S. Customs and Border Protection facilities for international arrivals, which I was talking about before. CPB does the arrivals from international. If you're coming internationally, then you gotta go through the CPB. I mentioned it earlier. Pre-clearance. What does that mean? What is pre-clearance? Before I do that, I don't think HOU is that'd be IAH. Oh, it is a international airport. What? Where is HOU? Because I've been. No, wait. Yeah, I've been to, no, I've been to HOU, but it was a domestic. Oh, it's international, primarily limited to destinations Mexico, Central America, and Caribbean. Domestic hub for Southwest Airlines. is, I know IAH is international. Yeah, George Bush International, Intercontinental. Non-stop connections to destination Europe, Asia, Africa, and Americas. I've heard that they were over there too. It's interesting that it is intercontinental, which is right here. It says intercontinental and it's not international. Interesting. So let's in air airports. Pre-clearance means an airport. What does that mean? Airport pre-clearance is a process where U.S. Customs and Border Protection will inspect travelers at foreign airports before they board U.S. bound flights. Passengers complete immigration, customs, and agricultural inspection at the departure airport, allowing them to arrive in the United States as domestic passengers, avoiding long lines by bypassing further customs checks at their final destination. It's so yeah. When I say that would happen over here, you do get that pre-clearance, but it's not going to be like that. It's not going to be for the benefit of of the country. Well, what is that saying? Because if it's coming, oh, so you, it sounds like you go through, um, when you go to that immigration passport thing, when you're coming in from an international airport from like another country and you go over there, it sounds like they have that on the other side where you wouldn't have to go through that process in the United States. So you would return as a U.S. passenger from a foreign country. I think that's what that says. Because you don't have to go through customs when you do that. I haven't been in that situation, but it sounds like that. You land in the United States and can leave immediately or connect directly to a domestic flight without needing to collect luggage or re-clear security. It it wouldn't be like that for them, for other countries, because they're not checking your baggage for their benefit of a foreign country. They're doing it to make sure that they're controlling, they're protecting the borders of other countries to make sure that you yourself cannot go unless you have permission, unless you have the nerve to say, "Well, I don't need one." Then they'll let you go, but you gotta know what the hell you're doing in order to do that. Yeah, they're gonna inspect your documents and all that, so then you can leave the nation. It's not the same thing, but you get a pre-clearance in a different kind of way. So yeah. Now what was I reading before? What is going on? Why can't I go forward anymore? I went back too many times. So yeah. What I'm trying to say is, for the if you don't know, like those employees. Let's say you go to Southwest or something. You know those employees that wrap your destination, where you're gonna go and where the bag goes. That's what the CPB officer would be. It would not be an airline employee. It would be under the entire airport will be under the jurisdiction of the DHS. ERQ. Whatever that says. I don't know what that says. ERQ, ERA. And someone might ask me, I got in my notes here, about national interest. So it says international airports oversight of national interests. So from a national security perspective, this is in their best interest. The oversight is democracy didn't see this coming. They don't know how. I mean, there are some people who know what airports work. If you've ever been to an international airport, you know how it goes. You know how it operates. You know the CPB is there. You know. If you don't know what I'm talking about, watch the movie The Terminal, where what happens when your country, you know, it's Kokosia. It's a fictional name. So Kokosia is a fictional Eastern European country featured in the 2004 film The Terminal, serving as the home of Victor Novarsky, which is Tom Hanks. It is depicted as a former Soviet bloc nation undergoing a violent military coup, which renders its citizens stateless and their passports invalid during the movie's plot. This was an international airport, JFK International Airport, which is New York, because its home country is no longer recognized. This is going to happen, and CPB is going to be in charge of all of that. Think of it, instead of someone coming over here, we're trying to leave. So what would that look like? Well, you'd have CPB on both sides, obviously. So for a person in a foreign country, you would just bring your passport to CPB and they'll check you in and all that. For an American citizen, you actually have to have documentation that says you can actually leave the country, because passport already grants a foreigner to leave the country. So there's that too. And the reason why that works is because the CIA has a lot of foreign influence, much more than the United States does on its own. And there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes with different countries, China, Iran, Russia, United Kingdom, Ukraine, all of them, where everyone knows who the CIA is. Everyone knows who they are. They have a very big reputation. And people who are traveling are piggybacking on them, not the influence of the United States. You got to get permission, like you had to in the Soviet Union through the KGB. You have to know why you're leaving, where you're going, where you're going to be. They're going to get into all your business. But, that's national security state, and we are heading that direction. But, I can't tell you how you're going to get out of that, but I can tell you that most people would not want to leave. Most international airports would probably be most likely empty. They do not want to go through that trouble. They don't want to go to D.C. if that's no longer part of America or the United States. Say, well, we might as well make it better here than go somewhere else. And there are going to be people who are like that. And it just locks down the country even more. Like, why do you even exist if you don't want to know what's going on around you? It's like Americans have no situational awareness whatsoever, and they want to blame everyone else coming through, anybody, and they want to make it such a big deal. Like, oh my God, craziness. Now, there are illegals, and there are people who are doing criminal stuff. I'm not arguing on that. But it's just, they're going after every single person. It's like, really, guys? Just open the damn border. If someone breaks the law, there you go. And people argue, well, we have such and such in the Constitution that says, well, we can't have U.S. They're not U.S. citizens. Well, what defines a U.S. citizen? There's nothing in the Constitution that defines a look. Besides where someone's born. A U.S. citizen is defined as someone born in the United States or its territories. Subject to its jurisdiction, anyone born abroad to the United States citizen parents meeting specific criteria or individuals who have successfully completed the naturalization process. Citizenship is formally a legal relationship often marked by a U.S. passport, the right to vote in elections, or the obligation to follow U.S. laws. Now, here's the problem with that. That's not part of the Constitution. It is part of the Constitution, but it's not part of the Constitution. It was not part of the Bill of Rights. That would be the 14th Amendment. That wouldn't be in the original Bill of Rights, would be the first 10 amendments. So, based on that, what defines a U.S. citizen? Nothing, because there's nothing that defines what a state is. There's nothing that defines what a territory is. The only thing that defined what that was the Department of Interior, which was what belongs to Native Americans and what doesn't belong to Native Americans. But other than the original Constitution and Founding Fathers, there is no definition of what a U.S. citizen is. If you want to look at a libertarian view on that. I said, now that was my understanding. But now I don't have much information. I don't research anything, but I would say, well, why would you make an amendment for that if it exists in the Constitution before? It's an interpretation. Well, it's not even an interpretation of the Constitution. It's just someone stupid wrote that in there. And they've used the 14th Amendment for different things like corporations, slavery, and all of that. It's a huge mess. It creates a lot of problems. So it said, yes or no, before the 14th Amendment, was there a definition of what a U.S. citizen was? It says no. The 14th Amendment is I said in one word, how messy is the 14th Amendment? Contested. It's extremely... we can go in here. What is the 14th Amendment? Ratified in 1868, it doesn't even apply because, well, it wasn't going to apply anyways because the Constitution Retrocession Act of 1846 completely threw this out. They granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States. Basically, this was slavery, including formerly enslaved people. This was about slaves. And guaranteed all citizens equal protection of the laws and due process. From 14th, you would have to define what a state was. You have to define what a territory is, and all that. And the Constitution doesn't define any of those things. Like I said previously, that a political party could be interpreted as a state. National security can be defined as a state. The Constitution is very ambiguous, but it has structure in there that shows, okay, this fits this. It forbids states from denying rights and has been used to apply the Bill of Rights to state governments. Again, what is a state? What is the government of a state? political party, Republican, Democrats. What's a state? A state of Texas could be a state. The state of the Union is a state. There's mindsets of what America is. That's a state. That's a state of mind. The state of the idea of America. That's a state. So it's a completely. It's not ambiguous as the Constitution, but it's completely messy. It's really one of the worst things they've ever added to the 14th Amendment. It actually did a lot more harm than good. In fact, it actually did like two-thirds vote on slavery. And I think there was something in here about that involving D.C. and how the enslaved, the people who were slaves have more rights to vote and all that than the citizens of D.C. have control in Congress. So it was like, now we got slaves doing it, like, and there was a civil war and everything. So yeah, it was a whole big mess. It says Section 3 Disqualification Clause bars individuals who have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States from holding state or federal office. From holding state office. Okay, does that mean the state of federal government? Well, it says federal office. So we're saying a state of federal office or political party, a state, political party, federal office. Could that be the president? There is so, like, state is not defined. It says the amendment was enacted during the Reconstruction era to protect the rights of newly freed enslaved people and to limit the power of states to discriminate. It would also address representation in Congress and invalidated debts incurred by the Confederacy. Yeah, representation of Congress. D.C. doesn't have any representation in Congress. And invalidated debts incurred by the Confederacy. Now you could say, well, what's a debt? And there's a whole thing about that too. So why is it contested? Because it's broad language, citizenship, equal protection, due process, left room for constant reinterpretation, so courts, politicians, and the public have fought over what it actually means ever since. I'm glad that it did that in such a sentence, that didn't give me an entire paragraph. Yes or no, is state defined in the Constitution? No. Like I said, state, that word alone is so, it's so ambiguous and so interpreted even by federal government. They can't even agree. Like, sure, the Supreme Court can say, oh, well, we can interpret that, but they've only made like maybe a few interpretations of what state means. But if you're looking at federal government, state can mean the federal office, your agency that you're working for. I mean, you're working underneath the Constitution. Sure, it's a reinterpretation of the Constitution, but it's so messy. The Constitution is one of the biggest piles of crap. If you actually understand what it's so stupid. It's so crappy, and I've said it best when I said that the Constitution was pretty much passed around by a group of drunken guys who debated on the most nonsensical thing you could ever. It's a debate of a debate. It's crazy. And you know, the sad thing about it is it's so irresponsible. It's highly irresponsible that you've had this Constitution set up this way, where the people who suffer the most from it aren't they were born 250 years, and we got to deal with this. when these guys died a long time ago. But me and you have to suffer through what this is about to do. It's highly irresponsible. It is what it is. What was that? Dude, that was wild what I just saw right there. Something just caught my eye over here. It says the CPU went to negative several digits of numbers in a percent. So I don't know what that was. Yeah, CPU usage went down like negative a million or something. I've never seen that before. Now it's stuck at 8.5. Anyways, I know I kind of went on a tangent at that last part, but you guys understand what I'm saying. There's so much. This 14th Amendment thing. It created more problems. And yeah, it was Reconstruction era. That would be after. Abraham Lincoln. But supposedly someone wanted or needed a amendment for people who were born in the United States that are no longer enslaved. I don't understand why you need a constitutional amendment for that. I mean, if they're born in the United States, they're automatically U.S. citizens. So what's the hold? Although, well, that's also creates a problem because the 14th Amendment defines itself for citizenship and all that. It's circle logic. The 14th Amendment, what it does, it defines that the United States Constitution never defined itself. So it's doing a lot of work. And it doesn't. I could go on and on about that. But anyways, I'll end it here. And yeah, it's a lot. So hopefully you took some notes. And I'll end it here. Let me see if there was anything else I needed to add. No, nothing needed to be added. So, I'll see you guys in the next one. I know I've done a lot of videos. Like you saw, it was March 23rd. I got videos going out. Well, this one will be on the 11th, I believe. Let me check. We have April 8th is my last video. That's for. Let me go into my calendar. No, it wouldn't be the 11th. It would be the 13th. Monday, April 13th. Okay. So, yeah. So, I guess you could say, I'll add this for the end. It says invalidated debts incurred by the Confederacy. You could say, well, could you get reappropriations out of that? It's a fair argument. It depends on what debts. I'm sure that it didn't define what a debt was in the 14th Amendment. Actually, that'd be a good question to ask ChatGPT. Let's see. I'm gonna assume the answer is no. I said yes or no. Did the 14th Amendment define what a debt of the Confederacy was? What was the words that was used? Incurred by the Confederacy. Debt incurred by the Confederacy. Does it define what that is? No. I figured as much. I mean, it's a, like I said, it's a piss poor amendment. I honestly figured. So yeah, they would be able to get appropriations out of that because the word debt was not defined by anything, and it's so if someone was a slave, then they should get paid. Um, Validated debts incurred by the Confederacy. But it doesn't define what a debt. What debt did it invalidate? It doesn't define that. So you just said there's debts. So are there debts to be paid? I, I'm reading this. So let's see what it says here. It says that this is about truth. Let's see what this says. Due process. Wasn't due process... I don't... They say the 14th Amendment was about due process, but I think... Wasn't due Wait, no, due process is in the 14th. So something about due process is not valid. So due process... That's interesting for Tyler Robinson. It could apply because of due process, because conservatives would use it. Huh. Interesting. I don't know. It declared that all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens. See, that's circle logic there. You're defining what it is. You're defining itself, even though the Constitution is not defining itself. So that's why you need an amendment to tell you what that means. But it's not a part of the original Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments. And prohibit states from upon citizens and immunities. Are we talking about all states? Infringing upon privilege or immunity. Depriving them of life, liberty, or property without due process. Or denying them equal protection. Okay, let me see. Prohibit states from infringing upon citizens' privilege or immunities, depriving them of life, liberty, or property without due process. Okay, that's a problem. Okay, so it declares that all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens. But by saying that, you're depriving them of liberty, life, and property without due process. Because you're defining them as something that they don't adhere to inherently by the U.S. Constitution, but you're defining it on themselves without due process. So what's the process in that? Unless you're saying, well, they gotta be naturalized, they gotta have all these papers. See, that's not freedom. You're still depriving them or denying them equal protection under the law. You're forcing them to a bubble that they didn't adhere to. If you're born in the United States, you're being deprived of life, liberty, and property without due process. You have no process when you're born and naturalized. That's a violation of its own self. That's stupid. The amendment defines citizenship. Stating that all persons born or naturalized in the United States are subject to its jurisdiction or citizens of both the United States and the state where they reside. But what does that mean? The Constitution has defined what a state where they reside is. Are we talking about a state of Texas? Like state of Texas? Are we talking about a state, like I said, a state of mind where they reside? What are we talking about? Subject to its jurisdiction are citizens of both the United States and the state where they reside. Both the United. So are we talking about the United States as a separate entity of the states? So we're not United States as in, dude. That's a whole. That's a. Like I said, we could go hours talking about this. It restricts states from making or enforcing laws that abridge the privileges and immunities of U.S. citizens. But that itself is a violation of itself. So this amendment itself could be a state. It restricts states from making or enforcing laws. You are making it. You're enforcing something that people don't have the due process to go against if they don't want to be U.S. citizens. You see, that abridges the privileges and immunities of U.S. citizens, but it defines who you are as a U.S. citizen. Even though, dude, that's the amendment prohibits states from depriving any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. What if someone wants to be their own person? What? They have to be a U.S. citizen? But you don't give them due process to do that. You can't go to the courtroom and say, hey, I don't want to be a U.S. citizen anymore. What, like, you can't do that unless you go somewhere to another country and denounce your citizenship. It's crazy. This is not what the Constitution says, guys. Equal protection. It ensures that all persons within the state's jurisdiction are afforded equal protection under the law, which means that everyone is equal, but I guess some are more equal than others. Regardless of race, ethnicity, or ethnic characteristics. Because when you're born, you're a U.S. citizen whether you like it or not. Other section. The 14th Amendment also includes provisions related to the apportion of representatives of in Congress, disqualification from holding office for those who engage in rebellion against the United States, and the validity of the public debt. And what? From holding office for those who engage in the validity of the public debt. So, what is that? I don't understand what that's saying. I don't understand what it means by also related to apportionment of the validity of the public debt. I know that says invalidated debts, but it's also saying disqualification of those who rebelled against the United States and the validity of the public debt. Well, there's this comma here. I'm very bad at commas. But either way, I guess I've done that. I said that the U.S. Treasury Department was invalid, and so I guess that makes me rebelling against the United, which I am. I am rebelling against the United States based on the 14th Amendment. But if we didn't have the 14th Amendment, we wouldn't be having this problem or this conversation. We wouldn't have CPB either, or ICE, for those who engage in rebellion against the United States. Who cares? It's not that great of a country, guys. Okay, that's interesting. Now, I remember this. A divided Ninth Circuit panel, July 23rd, wrote toward the one that President Donald Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship is unconstitutional. I remember this, and I was like, I don't understand what they're talking about. Why would they want to get rid of their citizenship if they're born in the United States? But now that I'm looking into this and realizing that the United States doesn't define what a U.S. citizen is, then you should be able to denounce your citizenship and denounce the 14th Amendment, because the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, they weren't amendments. The 14th Amendment is an amendment, so you can go against the amendment. Now, you'd be against the United States, as defined by the 14th Amendment, but you'd really be going against the 14th Amendment, holding that it violates the 14th Amendment citizenship clause. and affirming a nationwide injunction first issued by Seattle in case brought by Democratic-led states. I agree with this. I agree that I don't agree that it's. I agree that birthright citizenship is unconstitutional as defined by the Constitution, because it's not defined as what a U.S. citizen is and where they come from or anything like that into the 14th Amendment, which was an amendment to the Constitution, not part of the original Bill of Rights. I'm sorry if I keep repeating myself, but I'm trying to emphasize that. So the 14th Amendment needs to be thrown out. That's what you guys should have done. You shouldn't be going like, I denounce on citizenship. You should be going against that 14th Amendment. Writing for the majority, joined by, said universal relief was necessary and appropriate to protect states from the administrative chaos that would follow if the order took effect by families move across state lines. Now, I understand that this is being used in a way that's not being presented here. They're using it for something, for some political reason of bringing in illegals and all that. That's fine. Well, that's a problem for the United States, as defined by 14. I understand that part. But I also understand the 14th Amendment on its own. If you look at it from without immigration aside, without any illegals aside, it violates itself if you're an American born in the United States. Born in the territory of America in the United States. It gives the United States too much power. It says the president cannot redefine what it means to be American with the stroke of a pen. The 14th Amendment was a crucial part of the Reconstruction era amendments following the Civil War and ensuring equal rights for formerly enslaved people. It wasn't even needed for that. Unless there was, I would imagine that something in the Reconstruction Acts required a 14th Amendment, but it wasn't for the enslaved people themselves because they would already have those rights. So there was something else that required so it doesn't loop back into itself. From what we're seeing from the 14th Amendment, it is circular logic, but something in the Reconstruction Acts would require the 14th Amendment to exist, because otherwise we wouldn't need it. It has been interpreted by the Supreme Court to apply to Bill of Rights to the states. To apply the Bill of Rights to the states. What's the states? Meaning state government, what's state government? It cannot violate the rights guaranteed in the first 10 amendments. You shouldn't even have to say that. Of course, I could see how with the Confederacy, with the South and the North, you could say, well, we assimilated them into the United States, which actually removed independence for all the sovereign country, for all the states. The states were no longer independent and sovereign. They were part of the United States. It took away their liberties and their freedom. The 14th Amendment violated states on their own due process as well. So it carries down to the individual. And if you guys agree, I mean, I don't see why anyone would agree that 14th Amendment is a good thing. The Equal Protection Clause has been the basis for numerous landmark Supreme Court cases addressing issues of discrimination and civil rights. The Due Process Clause has been interpreted to protect a wide range of rights, including privacy rights and rights related to legal proceedings. But as we see with Tyler Robinson, we see that due process can actually be used for conservatives, where they can actually press something on anyone, depending on who your president is. If there's a Democratic president in power, then it would be liberals who would be able to put someone in jail and give them a death sentence on if their guy killed one of theirs, or they believed they did, then you could just use that and you go through a due process, but they're still going to get killed just because of what ideology says. It's a mob rule at that point. It's a huge mess, guys. It's bad. it has led us to this point. We're still paying for that. So yeah, guys, I apologize for being an hour long, but we really needed to talk about this. Um, so guys, I'll see you guys in the next one. It actually just turned 12 a.m. when I looked at that. So now it's March 24th, and I'm getting tired, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye for now.